The cold November wind howled through the streets as Daniel Carter, a man in his late 50s, tightened his scarf around his neck. He was about to enter a restaurant he had built from the ground up, but tonight, no one would recognize him. Dressed in a faded flannel shirt, worn-out jeans, and a pair of cheap sneakers, he looked like any other struggling worker searching for a job. His usual sharp haircut was now unkempt, and the Rolex that once adorned his wrist had been replaced with an old, scratched watch. Daniel hesitated before stepping inside La Belle Vie, his once proud creation, now a thriving establishment known for its exclusivity and high-class clientele. The warm aroma of freshly baked bread and grilled steak filled the air, but beneath the luxurious ambience, something felt off. Employees rushed past him without a glance, their expressions tense, their smiles forced. The energy in the room was cold, impersonal. At the front, a young hostess in a sleek black uniform barely looked up as he approached. "We're not hiring," she muttered before he even spoke, her fingers tapping impatiently on the podium. Daniel cleared his throat. "Actually, I came in about the dishwasher position. I saw the sign outside." His voice, usually commanding, was deliberately softened, made smaller, as if he had no authority, because tonight he didn't. The hostess sighed, rolling her eyes before gesturing toward a man near the bar. "Talk to him." "That's Mr. Reynolds, the manager." Daniel turned and spotted him instantly. Jack Reynolds. He knew the name well, though the man had never met him personally. Jack had been promoted to general manager last year, selected by the corporate office after Daniel had stepped away from day-to-day operations. In theory, Jack was supposed to uphold everything Daniel had built. But as he observed the man's arrogant stance, the way he barked orders at overwhelmed waiters, Daniel felt a pit form in his stomach. He approached cautiously, forcing a polite smile. "Excuse me, sir. I'm here about the dishwashing job." Jack turned, his blue eyes scanning Daniel with disdain. "You?" he scoffed. "You don't look like you could handle a kitchen. Are you even experienced?" Daniel nodded. "I've done my fair share of dishwashing. I just need a chance." Jack smirked, exchanging glances with a nearby waiter. "Fine, but don't expect much. Minimum wage, no benefits, and if you screw up, you're out." Daniel lowered his gaze, gripping his sleeves. "Understood." And just like that, the owner of the restaurant became its lowest-ranking employee, and no one had any idea who he really was. The kitchen was nothing like Daniel remembered. It had been years since he last stepped behind the scenes of La Belle Vie, and while the equipment was newer, the atmosphere was suffocating. Cooks moved frantically, sweat glistening on their foreheads as they rushed to keep up with the endless stream of orders. Waiters darted in and out, balancing trays with nervous precision, their hands gripping not just silverware but their last strands of patience. And then there was Jack. The general manager's voice cut through the air like a knife, barking orders with an air of superiority. "Move faster. I don't care if you're behind. If the food's cold, it's coming out of your paycheck." His words were sharp, but his tone carried something even worse, a complete lack of respect. Daniel swallowed hard as he stepped toward the dish pit. A younger worker, barely out of high school, looked at him with pity. "You're the new guy?" "I'm Lucas." He nodded toward the mountain of dirty plates. "Welcome to hell." Daniel chuckled lightly, rolling up his sleeves. "Thanks, kid. I'll survive." The first hour was brutal. The industrial sink spewed steam as Daniel scrubbed pan after pan, his fingers reddening under the scorching water. Plates piled up faster than he could clean them, and the clatter of silverware felt like thunder in his ears. It wasn't just exhausting, it was relentless. Then, the accident happened. One of the line cooks rushed past, bumping into Daniel just as he reached for a stack of plates. They slipped from his grasp, shattering against the tile floor. The kitchen went silent. Jack appeared within seconds, his eyes burning with irritation. "Are you kidding me?" He stepped closer, towering over Daniel. "You think we have money to waste on broken dishes? Who do you think you are?" Daniel exhaled slowly, keeping his composure. "It was an accident. It won't happen again." Jack scoffed. "Damn right it won't. One more mistake and you're out." He sneered, shaking his head. "Honestly, I don't even know why I gave you this job." Daniel felt something stir inside him. Anger, disappointment, maybe even regret. This was his restaurant. These were his employees. And yet, under Jack's rule, it had become something unrecognizable. A place of fear, not passion. As Jack stormed off, Daniel exchanged a glance with Lucas, who whispered, "You see what we deal with?" Daniel nodded, his jaw tightening. He wasn't just here to observe anymore. He was here to change things. Daniel pushed through the rest of his shift, his body aching from hours of scrubbing, stacking, and running plates back to the kitchen. The work itself wasn't the problem. He had done harder jobs in his life. But the way people were treated here, that was unbearable. At exactly midnight, Jack clapped his hands together, signaling the end of the shift. "All right, everyone. Tips are in the back. But before you go, let's have a quick meeting." Daniel noticed the tension immediately. The staff shifted uncomfortably, avoiding eye contact. Whatever this meeting was, they had been through it before. Jack folded his arms, his expression smug. "Slow night. You guys didn't upsell enough. So, management is taking a cut of your tips." A collective sigh rippled through the group, but no one spoke up. "Not yet." Lucas, the young dishwasher, gritted his teeth. "That's not fair. We work just as hard." Jack turned sharply, cutting him off. "You want to complain? Then quit. Plenty of people want your job." Daniel felt his blood boil. He had spent his life building businesses where employees were valued, where they took pride in their work. And now, here he was, watching a manager he had never met rob his workers blind. Daniel clenched his fists, but before he could speak, Lucas mumbled, "That's what I thought." He turned to Daniel, his eyes dark with frustration. "Get used to it, old man." Jack chuckled, tossing Daniel a rag. "Oh, and you? Don't be late tomorrow. I'm already regretting hiring you." Daniel forced a small nod, shoving his hands into his pockets as he stepped outside. The night air felt colder than before, sharper, filled with a different kind of weight. For the first time in years, he didn't feel like the owner of a multi-million-dollar business. He felt like a man whose own creation had turned against him. But that was about to change. Daniel didn't go home that night. Instead, he sat in his car across the street from the restaurant, watching as the last employees left, their shoulders slumped, their faces exhausted. The cold air fogged up his windshield, but his mind was too busy racing to care. How had things gotten this bad? He had built La Bellevue from the ground up, pouring his heart into every detail. The recipes, the ambience, the team. It was supposed to be a place where both customers and employees felt valued. Now, it was just another machine, running on fear and exploitation. Jack had to go. Daniel tapped his fingers against the steering wheel, thinking. If he walked in tomorrow as himself, firing Jack on the spot, nothing would change. The toxic culture had spread too deep. He needed proof, undeniable evidence of the corruption happening under his nose. At 7 a.m., he walked back into the restaurant, his uniform wrinkled, his hands still sore from the night before. The kitchen smelled of burnt coffee and stale grease. He wasn't here to work, though. Not today. Lucas was already there, stacking plates. He barely glanced at Daniel. "Hope you like disappointment. Yesterday's tips?" "Yeah, they disappeared." Daniel tensed. "Jack took them?" Lucas snorted. "Of course. Said they had to cover overhead costs." That was it. The final straw. Daniel exhaled slowly. Time for the next step. He turned to Lucas, lowering his voice. "Listen, kid. If I told you that things were about to change, would you trust me?" Lucas gave him a skeptical look. "You? What could you possibly do?" Daniel smiled for the first time in days. "Just wait and see." That night, when the shift ended, he didn't clock out. Instead, he hid. Tucked behind the supply closet, he watched as Jack counted the cash from the registers, slipping a thick wad into his pocket before dividing the rest. He recorded everything. Tomorrow, La Bellevue would have a new beginning. The next evening, the restaurant buzzed with its usual energy. Waiters rushing between tables, cooks sweating over hot stoves, and Jack standing in the middle of it all, barking orders like a self-proclaimed king. Daniel arrived early, blending into the background like any other worker. No one suspected that tonight would be different. As the dinner rush peaked, Jack gathered the tips as usual, his greedy hands stuffing a portion into his pocket before anyone could see. Or so he thought. Daniel stepped forward. "Actually, I think there's something you should see." Jack frowned, turning toward him. "What?" Daniel pulled his phone from his pocket and pressed play. The kitchen filled with the sound of Jack's own voice, counting money, stealing from his staff, bragging about how they would never do anything about it. The entire restaurant froze. Lucas's eyes widened. The waiters looked at each other in shock. The cooks stopped mid-motion, ladles in hand. The weight of the truth settled over everyone. Jack's face drained of color. Where did you get that?" His voice faltered, a stark contrast to his usual confidence. Daniel took a step closer, his expression calm but firm. "I've been watching, listening, and I think it's time for a change." Jack laughed nervously. "You're nothing but a dishwasher. Who do you think you are?" Daniel took a deep breath, straightened his posture, and looked Jack dead in the eye. "I'm the owner of this restaurant." The silence that followed was deafening. Lucas dropped a plate. A waitress gasped. Even the head chef, who rarely paid attention to anything but the food, looked stunned. Jack staggered back. "You're lying." Daniel reached into his pocket, pulled out his sleek black leather wallet, and tossed a business card onto the counter. "Daniel Carter, founder and CEO." Jack stared at it, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. Daniel crossed his arms. "Now, do you want to leave on your own? Or should I have security escort you out?" Jack didn't move at first, but then, as the realization set in, his arrogance shattered. His shoulders slumped. He muttered something under his breath and stormed toward the door, pushing past stunned employees and confused guests. As the door slammed shut behind him, the weight in the room lifted. For the first time in years, La Bellevue felt alive again. The silence in the restaurant lasted only a few seconds before it exploded into murmurs, whispers, and stolen glances. The staff stood frozen, absorbing what had just happened. The man they had seen as nothing more than a dishwasher had just fired the most feared person in the building. Lucas was the first to speak. You're really the owner?" Daniel nodded, his expression softer now, but still resolute. "Yes, and I owe all of you an apology." He turned, addressing the entire team. I built this place with a vision of respect, passion, and excellence. Somewhere along the way, that was lost. That's on me. The kitchen was still. Some employees exchanged wary looks, still uncertain. After all, owners didn't usually get their hands dirty. Daniel took a step closer, his voice strong but sincere. That changes today. He walked to the tip jar, the one Jack had been stealing from, and pulled out a thick envelope. This is everything he took from you. It's yours. Split it evenly. A gasp rippled through the staff. Lucas hesitated before stepping forward, taking the envelope with trembling hands. You mean it? Daniel nodded. Every penny. For the first time that night, a smile spread across the room. Small at first, hesitant, then growing as reality set in. The toxic rule was over. This place could be something better. He turned to the waitstaff. Your tips? From now on, they belong to you. No more cuts, no more excuses. To the cooks, fair wages. More reasonable hours. To everyone, respect. The tension in the air shifted. Employees straightened their shoulders. A new energy, one of hope, filled the space that Jack's fear had left behind. Lucas exhaled a shaky laugh, looking up at Daniel. I guess you're not so bad for an old man. Daniel chuckled, feeling something deep in his chest. Relief, gratitude, purpose. La Belle Vie was his again, and this time, he'd make sure it lived up to its name.